When I was 4 years old, my parents put me in this school called Calvary Baptist. It was associated or affiliated with this church, which was also, of course, called Calvary Baptist in Slidell, Louisiana. And that was my first exposure, my first point of contact with religion. Now, as a 25-year-old, I'm about to be 26, I don't know why my parents put me in that school because neither of them is religious. In fact, my dad, and I don't want to spill all of his business out there, but I think this is something he would stand by on or off camera. He is, I would say, vehemently opposed to at least Christianity. I don't know how he feels about other religions, but based on his experiences growing up in the church, he is definitely not Christian at all. So I don't know why they put me in that school, but I'm glad that they did because, in a way, my experience being at that school, even though I was only there for, I think, 1 year, was there for 1 year leading up to kindergarten, if that, my experience at that school helped me see what brainwashing looked like as a 4-year-old. Now, you're probably wondering, what do you mean by brainwashing? Well, basically, based on how I remember it, we would go into this school, and one of the first things they would have us do in the morning was sing hymns. We would sing songs glorifying God. Mind you, we are 4 years old. 4 years old. How are you supposed to develop your own opinion, your own perspective of the world if you're being subject to this degree of conditioning that early on? To me, at the time, it didn't make sense. And I think a big part of the reason why I sort of rejected it mentally was because I didn't like school in general. And so I sort of just conflated religion and school as two institutions that I pretty much just wanted no part of. And that was pretty much the case all throughout my childhood. I mentioned that my dad, he is not religious, but he is spiritual. And so instead of hearing about God and Jesus and those kinds of concepts, those terms growing up, I heard about the law of attraction, oneness, channeling, things of that nature, these esoteric new age concepts. In fact, one of my first real experiences with spirituality was my dad gave me this book. It was a 365 Tao book, which I guess technically that is a religion, Taoism, but neither here nor there. It's Eastern philosophy, so it's a little bit different. Anyways, he gave me this book, and it had 365 days worth of meditations in the book. And at 12 years old, I want to say this was 2012, I went through the whole entire book, one page, one meditation per day. So at 12 years old, I was out here meditating every single day, reading these passages from this book, just like a lot of other kids were probably praying every day, reading the Bible. And so in many ways, I guess you can say that even though I don't think I was indoctrinated in the same way, I think that I just sort of developed the capacity somewhere along the way to even question the things my dad would tell me about. In a sense, I was still adhering to a structure just like religion. And it wasn't until recently that I actually tried reading the Bible for the first time. Because, again, based on my experiences with religion and Christianity specifically, I didn't have a favorable opinion of it. I'm not going to lie. I respected those who did, but I fully acknowledged that I didn't. And shout out to my friend. I'm not going to name him, but he can comment below if he wants to be known for this. But my friend is actually the one who convinced me to try reading the Bible, not because he was trying to convert me to Christianity, but because he wanted me to just get a better understanding of this religion that I had pretty much rejected my whole entire life without really knowing a whole lot about. And on the flip side of that, I noticed that he was doing the same with Islam. And so knowing that I was about to go to Malaysia at the time, which is where I'm filming this video right now, which is a Muslim majority country, at least as far as I'm aware, I made a deal with him that if I read the Bible, he would read the Quran. And that's exactly what we did. I don't know how much of the book he read. I'm not going to lie, I didn't read a whole lot of the Bible. But what I did read shocked the hell out of me. No pun intended. It really, really blew my mind because, look, I only read maybe the first 6 or 7 chapters of both Genesis and Matthew, because those are the 2 books that my friend recommended to me to get a good overarching view of what Christianity actually is. And based on my limited scope of understanding, the conclusion that I came to was that Christianity, at least as it's presented in the Bible, is actually the exact same as the New Age spiritual stuff. And it's the exact same as the Eastern philosophy, Taoism stuff. Now, I'm not a religious scholar or anything like that. I'm not I think it's called theologian or whatever it's called. I don't know. I'm not that. I'm just a free thinker. At least I like to think I am. We all like to think we are. But it blew my mind to see that there was so much overlap. That in the first few lines of the Bible, I'm seeing stuff about oneness. And so I couldn't help but think back on my point of contact with religion, being in Calvary Baptist, telling those kids, look, I was a mean ass kid, I'm not going to lie, but I used to tell these kids, God is not real. You guys are tripping. I'm 4 years old telling these kids, God is not real. And they tell me, you're going to hell. I would say, I can't go to hell because hell's not real, because God's not real. I was just on demon time. Again, no pun intended. But it's interesting because I do think that as a 4-year-old, I was onto something. I kind of knew that what the Bible talks about, and specifically what the churches talk about, how the churches interpret and or present the Bible to people, is a little convoluted. They sort of take the message and distort it, and they play on human psychology. Now, the reason why I feel qualified to speak about this specifically is because in 2024, I went on this little binge of just learning as much as I possibly could about marketing psychology, because I wanted to understand why I fell off of YouTube and how I could get back on with my channel. And eventually I did. And if you've been following my journey throughout the years, you saw that. You saw that I applied these principles, albeit in a more morally just way, at least I like to think. But what I realized, if I could just sum up that whole year of just taking countless Udemy courses, reading countless books every single day, and actually applying this stuff in real life and seeing what worked and what didn't, the one thing that I came away with is that fear is the strongest emotion that humans have. And if you want to control people, or let's use a euphemism here, if you want to influence people, you utilize fear, especially if it's someone who doesn't already have rapport with you. So if you want to take a complete stranger and take your thoughts, your beliefs, and implant those beliefs in their mind with as little resistance as possible, fear is the shortest, most direct path to doing so. And this is why when you turn on the news, you always see negative shit. This is why I don't watch the news. Different discussion for a different day. But media, whether it be social media or traditional media, you see primarily negativity. Sure, you see some positivity interspersed here and there. I like to think that I'm a part of that, at least sometimes. But you see, at least at the time of me filming this, I have 300 subscribers on this channel, because generally this shit doesn't sell. It does not sell. And I think that the people, and I don't like saying the people and creating an us versus them, because that's another psychological manipulation tactic that they use. Think about how in every religion there's the enemy. Sometimes the enemy is the devil, sometimes it's the demons, sometimes it's temptation, and sometimes it's the other religions, or even other denominations of the same religion. It's always an us versus them sort of thing. And this is how they get you. And I don't know how people don't see it. I don't understand for the life of me how people cannot recognize this. in the sermons that their pastors are giving. I just don't understand. And to be fair, maybe it's not even the pastor's fault. They're just passing down what they've been taught from the people before them. And I guess I'm starting to realize that maybe being a free thinker or attempting to be a free thinker is actually not that common. It's really not that common. You would think social media would give people the impetus to maybe explore their own independent lines of thinking, but in all actuality, from what I can tell, it's just amplifying groupthink because it's human nature. Now, speaking of human nature, something else that I've noticed about humans, and I don't even think I picked this up in any of the marketing psychology courses. This is just some shit that I've observed, especially in analyzing religion, is I've noticed that people, by and large, the majority of humans on this planet have a tendency when trying to describe their beliefs about God and religion and the divine and whatever the fuck you want to call it. Whenever they describe what this means to them, they always try to describe it based on their limited human perceptions. Let me give you a really great example of this. So, if you haven't heard the parable of the blind men and the elephant, let me go ahead and put you on some game right here. Listen very, very closely to this. A group of blind men heard that a strange animal called an elephant had been brought to the town, but none of them were aware of its shape and form. Out of curiosity, they said, "We must inspect and know it by touch, of which we are capable." So they sought it out, and when they found it, they groped about it. The first person, whose hand landed on the trunk, said, "This being is like a thick snake." For another one, whose hand reached its ear, it seemed like a fan. And for another person, whose hand was upon its leg, said, "The elephant is a pillar like a tree trunk." The blind man who placed his hand upon its side said the elephant is a wall. Another who felt its tail described it as a rope. The last felt its tusk, stating the elephant is that which is hard, smooth, and like a spear. So, if you're not already connecting the dots, I'm saying that to say, I share that story to say that, and this isn't a new take, by the way. This is something that I'm sure many people have said before, but I'm going to try to describe it as it pertains to my own life experience. Because if you watch this channel, you probably relate to my life experience. So maybe this will hit a little bit closer to home for you. I say this to say that I think all religions are onto something. Even atheism. I'm going to call atheism a religion in itself. It's just a set of beliefs at the end of the day. Or rather, it's a set of interpretations. I think that people, because the average reading level, at least in the US, is what, a 7th grade reading level. I'm reading the Bible. I'm good at reading. At least I like to think I am. I always took AP English and I got really, really good grades in it. And even I struggle to decipher some of what the Bible says. So I know that the average person, especially a fucking 4-year-old in Calvary Baptist, is probably going to struggle as well to decipher what the Bible is saying, depending on what version of it they come across. And the same applies to the Quran or the Hindu book. I don't know how to pronounce the name, but you know what I'm talking about. All the religious texts, because a lot of these are generations old. And I'm kind of just going on a tangent here, but this is my roundabout way of saying that all religions are right. It's just that people get so lost in the metaphors that they lose sight of the truth because they're so focused on avoiding the things that they fear, such as going to hell, that they end up living there their whole lives anyways, without realizing that heaven was here. It was right here. And I know in some religions, they speak about reincarnation as opposed to an afterlife. I think they're the same thing. And maybe I can go more in depth about that in another video if you want me to. But even if I try to go in depth about that, I don't know if I'll really be able to, because as I've had these discussions with my friend about religion, I've noticed that as I try to articulate what I'm seeing in the Bible, what I'm seeing being in an Islamic country, what I'm seeing in my day-to-day life, I can tell a decent portion of it he doesn't really understand. And that's not because there's any kind of intellectual gap between us. In fact, that's why I trusted him enough to even try reading the Bible in the first place, was because I trust his intellect enough to know that he would not try to lead me astray. Okay, we've had many, many deep conversations throughout the years. I value his insight as much as anybody on this planet, and he knows that. But I can tell that the way that I'm trying to articulate what God actually means to me, it doesn't really make sense to him because he is a Christian. And as a Christian, he sees God through the lens that he's been taught to see God through. And that's not to say he hasn't had his own mystical experiences. I think that everyone has these experiences if they're open to receiving them. It's more so to say that the process of articulating what that is. I've noticed, for example, that with him, and again, to the friend, I know you're watching this, we can talk about this on our next call as well. But I've noticed that with him, he is very grounded in physical reality, in that if I share a spiritual insight, whether it be how I interpreted a specific Bible verse or something that I read in a spiritual book, whatever the case may be, just something I observed in my day-to-day life even, he wants to know the practical implications of it. He wants to know how he can take this insight, apply it to his life in the physical realm, and change his life for the better in that way. And I've noticed that's kind of the discrepancy between us, is that for me, I don't really have that same need because I fundamentally view this life right here, this physical, real, material realm, as the dream world. And the actual world is the spiritual world. And I know I'm getting all woo-woo and esoteric here, but the point is, life is actually less about the actions you take and more about the perspective you have, because the perspective you have informs the actions that you take. And it's funny because with the story about the blind men and the elephant, all of these different religions have tried to articulate what God is, what God means. And something that I've brought up to my friend is that, at least in Christianity, from what I've seen, there's a lot of talk about the enemy. And the enemy, again, could be the devil, it could be temptation, demons, other religions, other denominations, whatever else, anything in between and beyond. But I sort of reframed it for him in a way that I don't know if he really understood what I meant by this. I think he did conceptually, but again, he's a more practical-minded person. But maybe you're more like me. And if you're more like me, then this is probably going to make some kind of sense to you. But if we look at this through the analogy of basketball, I'm a really big basketball fan. I follow the NBA. Shea just hit a game winner against Denver. And I mean, that's just what I like to do in my free time. I like to follow ball. So if we look at this from the standpoint of basketball, a lot of people think about it as God and the devil are the two championship teams in the finals is game 7, every single game. And it's for all the marbles. This is for everything. And you have to decide which team you are going to support, which jersey you are going to put on. And I'm not here to invalidate that belief. I'm here to, if that's what you believe watching this, I'm here to ask you to step beyond that for a second. Okay. Imagine if God is not a God of good or evil, but rather a God of unconditional love, meaning a God of neutrality, a God who holds space for positivity and negativity with equal regard. And this is something that my friend and I have also debated about even very recently. In fact, our last call was kind of what inspired me to make this video, but this idea of good and evil, the idea that God is not responsible for the evils of the world. It has to be the devil. And my response to that is we are the ones who define what good and evil actually is. And so again, it goes back to the blind men, the people who are in the material realm, as we all are. Okay, we're here. Here, you just heard that. You hear my voice right now. We have our senses. Hopefully, we have all of them. But even if you don't have all of them, you have some of them. We all have access to these senses, and we map out what we believe reality to be according to our senses, but our senses are flawed, both literally and figuratively, in that we cannot impose our limited human understandings of the world onto an infinite being. God is not a team. God is the league that the teams play in. And just like in the NBA, I'm not here to start a debate about favoritism or rigging or anything like that, but assuming that the NBA is a neutral league with no rigging or no scripting or anything like that, it's just a container for the teams in it. That's how I see God. God is the league that the teams are in. And notice, the league is not tangible. When you think about the NBA, what do you think about? You think about NBA basketball. You think about the hardwood courts and maybe Madison Square Garden or, I don't know, Staples Center. You think about LeBron James, Michael Jordan. You think about players. You think about physical representations of it. Just like if I think about God, maybe I think about the trees or animals or my girlfriend. I think about physical representations because they're all around us. Again, if God is the container, then God is represented by everything within the container. But that doesn't mean that God is constrained by all of the things within the container. In other words, I don't look at the Oklahoma City Thunder and think that's the league right there. The league is a concept. The league is ambiguous. It's vague. It's something that you can't grab with your hand. You can experience it. You can experience the physical representations of it. But ultimately, the league is not something that is here. But it is at the same time. And if you notice, I'm talking in circles trying to articulate the shit because, again, it's incredibly difficult. If it were easy to articulate, then there wouldn't be wars about religion. And everyone would fundamentally agree about what the fuck is going on in this world. But evidently, that is not the case. And yet, at the same time, when you look at the spiritual texts, when you read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle and different books by Deepak Chopra, and you have a twin flame experience, you have a psychedelic experience, you take shrooms, and you read the Bible, and you see people with the Holy Ghost and all of these different things, you realize that everyone actually does agree. Everyone agrees, they just don't know that they do because they're so caught in the physical representations. They're caught up in who's better, Oklahoma City or Denver. They're caught up in those discussions. They're caught up in who's better, LeBron James or Michael Jordan, rather than just observing the league for what it is. And I sincerely hope this is making sense because it's funny. Just before starting this video, I was thinking about how impossible it is to articulate God because, again, just like our senses, words are human constructs. And so, I mean, trying to contain God within the word God, for example, I mean, people get all pissy if you don't capitalize the word God. It's like, my brother in Christ, you're missing the point. You're missing the point. I understand that some people have these principles and they like to abide by these principles. And I respect that. I respect that people out here in Malaysia will pray 5 times a day and they will go to the mosque and I can hear them chanting and it's beautiful. It's beautiful to witness. I'm not saying that the physical representations and the rituals are mutually exclusive with the league, because I meditate every single day myself. And if I don't meditate, I feel off. So I completely get it. But at the same time, don't miss the forest for the trees. Don't miss the forest for the trees. What is a forest? It's an idea. The trees are what make it what it is physically. But a forest, just like a league, is just an idea. And the trippy part is when you realize that all of this, even the physical realm, is just an idea. It's all energy vibrating. That's all it is. And so everything is just an idea in God's head. But God isn't a person. God doesn't have a head. God just is. God is infinite. God is not God. God is. God is the experience. God is faith. We don't have faith in God. God is the faith that we have. God is the love that we have. God is neutrality. Why does God allow evil things to happen? It's because to be God and to have unconditional love and to be an infinite being is to hold space for all parts of the experience. Why doesn't the league just kick out all of the teams that are really, really bad? Because those teams have a right to exist as well, even if they don't sell the most tickets. And this also isn't me saying that one should just completely disregard the physical realm at all. Believe me when I tell you that that is not what I'm telling you. If you end up in prison behind some shit you did based on what I told you in this video, I do not take responsibility and I am not financially liable for putting money on your books. But if that does happen, then I hope when you're in prison and you are no longer distracted by what you see around you, you find God. You find God, not the Word, not the man in the sky with a big beard and all of these personifications, but you find the experience. And my purpose in this life, as far as I'm aware at the very least, is to do my best to articulate God with my words, be it through videos like this, through poetry, through storytelling, really at the essence. And that's why in this revised version of Ego Death that I'm currently working on, I think this is truly the closest that I've come to this point to articulating what God actually means to me.